There is a mist that rolls in and out of my head like tule fog, with only glimpses of what appears to be faces I know that fade before name comes, voices hanging in the mist and then drip away. People are fading from my memory. I do not like this. I am missing you, each and of you and all of you. Your quirks, your love, your grumbles, your care. You who always were there to say yes. You who left after things smiling and promised to return. I miss the electrifying buzz of energy when that elusive critical mass of humanity gathers, and when only a handful of the faithful venture out against the wind and rain and sleet and even snow. I miss the food, the foundation of our morning, Marilyn's deviled eggs and Robert's gluten-free sweets, Jim's instant replay of salami and cheese and Rhonda's desserts, among a lot of other things. And most, I miss the Sabbath, our Sabbath. I miss the morning assembly. With wireless mics that go dead and squeal, music that touches my soul, singing that is both pleasant and, well, painful. I miss worship leaders whose words bring me to tears, and those who unfortunately can't quit until after 12:30. The sound of the Tibetan bowl, the Sneller Memorial window glowing, and the empty chairs waiting. The empty chairs waiting. Missing is how I spend my days. Missing connections, community, and commitment. I'm not alone by being alone. We are all in our own diaspora, part of a community of caring souls who abdicates being together for the greater good of all. This wondrous part of missing, the wondrous part of this missing, is that it's not forever, just for now. It's hard because missing causes sorrow, but also hope. Choose hope, friends. It settles in the soul right alongside of misery, and together we become blessed. It's good to be sharing this long-distance gathering our spirits, harvesting our power to kindle the flame of our faith, so we might witness the mystery of this hour. Together, gathering in peace, love, and hope, starting now.
Our
listen to these words as together we light our chalice, and I encourage you to light one if you have one at home. Remembering the past and remembering this community, we light our chalice to seek the light of truth, to share the warmth of love, and to live the energy of action. Join with me in our spoken affirmation. The words are on the screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. I almost said, please be seated. Our opening thought. Our democracy is in crisis. Many institutions of our government are dysfunctional and getting worse. Our electoral system has produced, in a single generation, 2 presidents who receive fewer votes than their opponents. A changed media landscape, has, with the shrewd assistance of malicious actors at home and abroad, loosened our collective grasp on reality. Our politics have become alarmingly acrimonious. One of the potential disasters of the 2020 election is a result that is widely considered illegitimate. Technology is enriching some, leaving others behind. Meanwhile, as the country's demographics shift, a nativist far right is resurgent. Although Donald Trump, with his scant regard for the value of justice and the rules of law, is undeniably a leader actor in this crisis, it preceded him and seems certain to persist after his departure, whenever that might be. If the Trump era has proved anything, it is that American democracy, which has never been without profound flaws, cannot be taken for granted. From the editor of The New Yorker. Our reading this morning comes from Jill Lepore, a professor at Harvard University. This is from a piece that she entitled, "The Last Time Democracy Died." The last time democracy nearly died all over the world and almost at once. Americans argued about it, and then they tried to fix it. The future of democracy is topic number 1 in the animated discussions going on all over America, wrote the New York Times in 1937. In the legislatures, over the radio, at luncheon tables and in drawing rooms, at meetings and forums and in all kinds of groups of citizens, everywhere people are talking about the democratic way of life. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson administration had promised that winning the Great War would make the world safe for democracy. The peace carved nearly a dozen new states out of the former Russian and Ottoman and Austrian empires. The numbers of democracies in the world rose. The spread of liberal democratic governance appeared to be certain forever, but this was no more than a dream. Infant democracies grew, toddled, wobbled, and fell. Hungary, Albania, Poland, Lithuania, Yugoslavia. In older states, too, the desperate masses turned to authoritarianism. Benito Mussolini marched on Rome in 1922. Now fascism and communism toppled these governments in a matter of months, even before the stock market crash of 1929 and the misery that ensued. In 1931, people all over the world were seriously contemplating and frankly discussing the possibility that the Western system of society may break down and cease to work. In 1933, as Hitler came to power, the American political commentator Walter Lippmann wrote that the old relationships among the great masses of the people of the earth have disappeared. What's next? There were more epitaphs. Greece, Romania, Estonia, and Latvia. Authoritarians multiplied in Portugal, Uruguay, Spain, Japan, invaded Shanghai, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. The present century, oh, I'm sorry. No, let's see. We don't have to start all at the beginning of that reading. I'm supposed to. Okay. The screen is supposed to stop and continue. All right. In 1931, people all over the world were seriously contemplating and frankly discussing the possibility that the Western system of society might break down and cease to work. In 1933, as Hitler came to power, the American political commentator Walter Lippmann wrote, "The old relationships among the great masses of the people of the earth have disappeared." What's next? There were more epitaphs. Greece, Romania, Estonia, and Latvia. Authoritarians multiplied in Portugal, Uruguay, Spain, Japan invaded Shanghai, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. The present century is a century of authority, Walter Lippmann declared, a century of the right, a fascist century. American democracy, too, staggered, weakened by corruption, monopoly, apathy, inequity, political violence, hucksterism, racial injustice, unemployment, even starvation. We do not distrust the future of this essential democracy, FDR said, telling Americans the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. But there was more to be afraid of, including Americans' own declining faith in self-government. Our first musical selection, "Soon the Day Will Arrive," a Jewish song of hope, meaningful for us today on many levels. Enjoy, good people.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunderclouds will appear. So wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. So wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. So some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with a new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. So wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
For our practices today, a poem by the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, theologian and the past president of Starr King School for Religious Leadership, one of our UU seminaries. She writes, "In the midst of a world marked by tragedy and beauty, there must be those who bear witness against unnecessary destruction and who, with faith, stand and lead in freedom with grace and power. Those who speak honestly and do not avoid seeing what must be seen of sorrow and outrage or tenderness and wonder. There must be those whose grief troubles the waters, while their voices sing and speak refreshing words. There must be those whose exuberance rises with lovely energy that articulates earth's joys. There must be those who are restless for respect and loving companionship among human beings, whose presence invites people to be themselves without fear. There must be those who gather with the congregation of remembrance and compassion, draw waters from old wells, and walk the simple path of love for neighbor. And there must be communities of people who seek to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God, who call on the strength of soul force to heal, transform, and bless life. There must be religious witness." And now a time for stillness, thought, and private prayer. One of the things that gives me the greatest solace is knowing that our religious tradition is ripe with dissent. As a kid, I used to dream that the guys that threw the tea in the Boston Harbor were probably Unitarians. I have no idea, but it was a nice dream. Now, our evangelic friends and their neighbors are always reminded on a regular basis by their pastors how wonderful the President of the United States is. And given the number of fundamentalist and evangelic churches and their connection to the Republican Party, it's no surprise that the religious communities on the far right of the political spectrum began lobbying the White House on the 21st of January, 2017, to remove the Johnson Amendment, which was created in 1959 and attached to the U.S. Tax Code. It was the one that said you can't speak in favor or against a political candidate if you are in a nonprofit company. We know that they've done it, and they continue to. But here comes now the time when we, the people, must gather our resources, our strength, and our knowledge that this nation of ours is in peril. Whether Republican or Independent or Democrat or a neutralist or a none, N-O-N-E, or a I really don't give a damn. It's time to speak out, just as Americans have been speaking out for over 240 years. What I think motivates me the most now is this growing understanding of how our democracy is evolving into an autocracy. See, I don't even like the word. It probably says something. The shift is at the core of who we are as a people, and it is deeper than political parties or allegiances. You know, each year, the Economist magazine publishes what they call the Democracy Index. It looks at 167 countries. Their scale ranges from full democracy to full atrocities, I would say. It began in 2006, and at that year, we were the 17th most democratic nation in the world. 10 years later, we no longer were in the top tier, but now in the section that's called flawed democracies. And since 2016, we have slipped even further. We are currently, in the year 2020, the 25th most democratic nation on earth. We're becoming a nation of misinformation, tribalization, domestic terrorism, human rights abuses, political intolerance, social media mob rule, white nationalism, a criminal president, a nobbling of Congress, a corrupt presidential administration with assaults on the press. That's quite a litany, and I would love to say that I can take credit for it, but I cribbed it out of the same article from our reading this morning. So the Johnson Amendment be damned, it's time to talk Trump. Like many, I came to an understanding that democracy is gasping for clean air. And it wasn't a aha moment, but a gradual realization that we're in trouble. Though I know exactly when it began for me. January 22nd, 2018, about 2:30 in the afternoon, when I was driving back from Terrell, Texas, after looking to adopt Emerson, the elder. Fresh Air was on NPR, and two Harvard professors, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, were discussing what makes democracies healthy and what leads to their demise. They warned that America's democracy is in difficulty. Their book, new at the time, How Democracies Die, was the subject of the piece. They spent 15 years looking at what makes democracies flourish and wither worldwide. They argue that many players in American politics are disregarding hard-held norms that have kept the political rivalries in balance and prevented the kind of bitter conflict that can lead to a repressive state. Levitsky and Ziblatt explained the way democracy seemed to die is not what we thought. Time was democracies died in a hail of gunfire. Military coup. Such takeovers were typical during the Cold War. Sometimes they happen still, but much less often. In fact, the primary ways democracies have died in the last 30 years is at the hands of the elected leaders, at the hands of the governments that were often freely or close to freely elected, who then used the democratic institutions to weaken and then destroy democracies. Military coups happen literally overnight. Instant events. Electoral authoritarians come to power democratically, slowly, legitimately, as a result of being elected. In the beginning, very few people, if any, thought Donald Trump would end up the president. He had zero endorsements from any political leaders of the Republican Party. Yet, he was elected fairly. He has an electoral legitimacy. Trump was no ordinary candidate. Not only was he uniquely inexperienced, no U.S. president who hasn't been a successful general or had an office as a cabinet member has ever been elected president. But his demagoguery, extreme views on immigration and Muslims, willingness to violate basic norms, praise for Vladimir Putin and other dictators generated unease in much of the media, and the political establishment had Republicans nominated, did they elect a dictator? Many Republicans latched on to the saying, whereas Trump's critics took him literally but not seriously, his supporters took him seriously but not literally. His campaign rhetoric became mere words. No one knows how a politician with no track record is going to behave in office. But inexperienced leaders are often identifiable before they come to power. Levitsky and Ziblatt created what they called a litmus test for autocrats. Trump, even before he was inaugurated, was considered to have been part of the litmus test. The first sign is a weak commitment to the democratic rules of the game. During the campaign, he kept insisting that millions of illegal immigrants and dead people were on the voting rolls and would be mobilized to vote for Clinton. Trump had the edge, of course, of Fox News. In October before the election, Politico carried out a poll and found 41% of Americans and 73% of Republicans believe the elections could be stolen from Trump. That's 3 out of 4 Republicans were no longer sure we had free elections. The second category of the litmus test is a denial of the legitimacy of one's opponent. Think of all of the tweets about crooked Hillary and the lock her up chants. The third criteria is a toleration or encouragement of violence. Creating ways to approve violence is very often a precursor of a democratic breakdown. Think of the brown shirts in Germany, the black shirts in Italy during Mussolini and Hitler's rise, the leftist guerrillas in Uruguay. In the last century, not one major party presidential candidate has ever endorsed violence. There was George Wallace in '68, but he was a third-party candidate. Trump not only tolerated, but encouraged and even reveled in it. Remember at a rally in North Carolina, Trump said Clinton would fill the Supreme Court with justices that would abolish the right to bear arms. He went on to say, quote, "If she gets to pick her judges, nothing you folks can do, folks. Though the Second Amendment people, yeah, maybe there is. I don't know." End quote. The final warning for the litmus test is a readiness to curtail the civil liberties of rivals and critics. What separates contemporary autocrats from the democratic leaders is their intolerance of criticism and their readiness to use their power to punish those in opposition in the media or in civil society who criticize them. Remember when Trump promised to have a special prosecution investigation of Clinton and kept insisting that Clinton should be imprisoned? The four indicators of authoritarian behavior: rejection or a recommendation to democratic rules of the game, denial the legitimacy of political opponents, toleration or encouraging of violence, and a readiness to curtail civil liberties of opponents, including the media. Donald Trump scores 100 on the litmus test. The United States, as we know, was the first country in the world to have an office of president elected by the masses. Scores of other nations have followed that lead. In fact, a handful of nations' constitutions were heavily inspired, if not actually copied, from ours. The founders intentionally wrote a fairly brief constitution. It is basically a set of rules, but there aren't enough of them to guarantee our democracy will continue. It would be impossible to have every aspect of operating a country written down in a document. For 240 years, those who we elected to public office have been operating by informal rules, by norms. Two are critical to sustaining a democracy: mutual toleration and forbearance. Mutual toleration is at the core of most any human interactions and relationships. Politicians' acceptance that those on the other side of the aisle are legitimate is key to mutual toleration. There will always be disagreements with our rivals, but we do not see them as enemies. Over the last decade, that has, for the most part, disappeared. Time was we could disagree and disagree strongly, but at the end of the day, we recognize publicly in the media and privately with our followers that the other side is equally patriotic and cares equally about our democracy, and their governance is legitimate. We do not see them as mortal enemies. That's gone now. We have no respect for the unwritten norms that run our government. Today, there is no mutual toleration. Also missing today is forbearance, in that politicians show restraint in exercising their power. Our Constitution gives the president, any president, a lot of power, including executive orders. Presidents can essentially rule by decree. But what's critical with forbearance is the ability to self-restraint on the part of politicians. Trump blatantly flaunts both forbearance and mutual toleration. Think tweets, friends, thousands of them. Levitsky said, commenting on the Fresh Air program, something that has stuck with me. He said there's been a subcurrent that we have felt in American political cultures over time, and even in the 20th century, with people like Henry Ford, Huey Long, Joe McCarthy, and all the way to George Wallace and Trump. A subcurrent seen in about 30%, going all the way back to the 1930s. 30% of the electorate supporting candidates who often seem to have questionable commitments to democratic norms. They feel that it has been the Republican Party that has led the way and has been more willing to violate the norms of democracy. Starting back in the 1990s with the partisan impeachment of Bill Clinton, in 2003, the mid-district redistricting in Texas, which was pushed by Tom DeLay, and the denial, or I would like to think the theft, of a Supreme Court seat with the refusal even to take up the nomination of Merrick Garland in 2016, and the so-called legislative coup pulled off by the Republican-controlled legislature in North Carolina in 2016. Acts of constitutional hardball carried out by the Republicans have played heavily on where we find ourselves now. One way a state or nation can save its democracy involves some soul searching and hard decisions on the part of political leaders. It calls on people to place democracy over politics, partisan politics. This occurred in France in 2017 when it appeared that Jean-Marie Le Pen, a far-right candidate, could be elected president. Faced with a sudden potential threat, the rival candidates from three opposing parties got together and endorsed Emmanuel Macron, who was elected. They gambled their political future and they risked losing their careers by endorsing a candidate from the other side. But they knew Le Pen was a disaster waiting to explode. They bonded together, swallowed their differences, and saved the Republic of France. And the same thing happened later in Austria. Republicans disliked Trump long before he became a candidate. Once he did, not one mainline Republican endorsed him until after Super Tuesday. Imagine how different it might have turned out if the presidents, George Bush, both of them, Senators Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell, John McCain, and the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, had all endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. History, friends, is giving the Republican Party a do-over in November. The leadership of the Republican Party could stop what has been called the Great Republican Abdication by endorsing the Democratic candidate. Trump is ratcheting things up right now. Over the last week, his tweets have soared to 4 times what they were 2 weeks ago. On last Wednesday, he retweeted a video that says, "The only good Democrat is a dead Democrat." In just over 5 months, we will have the most critical election of our lifetime. In the meantime, Our days turn into weeks, and our path is not clear, but we're not alone. We guide and we hold each other. I get strength by knowing you are out there, and I hope that each of us can feel how our congregation is holding ourselves together even when we are separated. Ask yourself, how do we hold each other up from a distance? If we have a sacred task, and I believe we do, it is to keep our community a place of love, compassion, and acceptance. Because I know we believe in life and the strength of love, and we have found a need to be together. So it may be, friends. Shalom and amen.
Truth, equality, and blessed peace of love. of what we find.
And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found our joy being together, and in our search for peace, may we not find all they see, even to question truly is an answer.
A parting thought, again from Dr. Rebecca Parker. Your gifts, whatever you discover them to be, can be used to bless or curse the world. The mind's power, the strength of the hands, the reaches of the heart, the gifts of speaking, listening, imagining, seeing, waiting. Any of these can serve to feed the hungry, bind up wounds, welcome the stranger, praise what is sacred, do the work of justice, or offer love. Any of these can draw down the prison door, hoard bread, abandon the poor, obscure what is holy, comply with injustice, or withhold love. You must answer this question: what will you do with your gifts? Choose to bless the world. The choice to bless the world is more than an act or will, a moving forward into the world with the intention to do good. It is an act of recognition, a grateful acknowledgement that in the midst of a broken world, unspeakable love arises. There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. And while there is injustice or evil, there moves a holy benevolence, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting that which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage. The choice to bless the world can take you into solitude to search for the sources of power and grace, native wisdom, healing, and liberation. More, the choice will draw you into community, the endeavor shared, the heritage passed on, the companionship of struggle, the importance of keeping faith, the life of ritual and praise, the comfort of human friendship, the company of earth, and the chorus of life welcoming you. None of us alone can save the world. Together, that's another possibility waiting. Join me as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Be well, friends.